Muskoka.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honor to stand in this House, of course, and speak as always, but of course in this special occasion I'm particularly grateful to my dear friend and colleague from Battle River Crowfoot, who just told a story about the legendary Stan Darling, former member of Parliament for Parry Sound Muskoka, which of course is the magnificent part of this country that I'm honored to represent here today. Because Stan Darling, of course, represents in many ways the very beginnings of my understanding of politics and recognition of political life. As is Prime Minister Mulroney, who was my first Prime Minister. My earliest recollections of Prime Ministers was Prime Minister Mulroney when he first got elected. And I remember as an elementary school student, this grand campaign to raise awareness about acid rain and its deleterious effects on the lakes and the forests of Canada. Stan Darling, the Member of Parliament for Parry Sound Muskoka at the time, was a champion for arresting the causes and the effects of acid rain and to address this issue, a binational issue, not just a Canadian issue, but a binational issue. And he was a champion to the point that he was in the ear of Prime Minister Mulroney enough that he finally convinced the Prime Minister that this was an issue that we had to address. And I remember writing a letter as a small kid in elementary school about acid rain to the Prime Minister of the country, and I remember with great awe receiving a response from the Prime Minister, assuring me that the Prime Minister thought it was an important issue and that they were working to deal with it. I felt incredibly special as a kid in grade 4 or grade 5, whatever it was, to be getting a letter from the Prime Minister of Canada. And I fast forward to my first year in university when Prime Minister Mulroney resigned, and having watched his career and as my first Prime Minister, and I remember taking the day off school the day he resigned and watching every moment of it on television and writing him another letter to thank him for his leadership, particularly on acid rain, because that was the issue that stood out in my mind most particularly. But what I thought was inspired leadership, and we've heard so many speakers here tonight talk about the remarkable statesmanship and the courage of this man to expend political capital to do what he felt and he knew was right for Canada, not for tomorrow and not for political purposes, but what was right for Canada for generations to come. And I was once again incredibly honored to receive a letter back, which he thanked me for my letter and assured me that he did in fact believe that he governed for what was right for Canada for generations to come and not for tomorrow, not just for political expediency. And so in many ways this is part of the inspiration for me as a little kid growing up in Huntsville, knowing the Prime Minister's story, growing up the son of an electrician in small town Quebec. I was the son of an electrician growing up in small town Ontario. Not a wealthy family. I grew up in a family a Jehovah's Witness family that was not remotely interested in politics. We weren't supposed to vote. We weren't supposed to be interested in politics, and yet I secretly was always. Admired this man I thought was a great leader. And so in many ways, Brian Mulroney was my inspiration to enter politics. And at the ripe old age of 21, I was convinced to run for public office in my community of Huntsville, and by the skin of my teeth, I got elected. It's in many ways quite surprising, and of course it changed the trajectory of my life quite dramatically. I spent a whole lifetime almost really in municipal politics. I was the councillor for many years. I ultimately became the deputy mayor of Huntsville. I was the mayor of Huntsville for one term, then got re-elected, and after only a year after my re-election, was elected to Parliament. And after getting elected to Parliament, something that I had never really thought of again I thought of it early days when I was watching the Prime Minister in this place, how he would debate. I regret not having my reading glasses with me, Madam Speaker, because I had this moment where I thought, I'm going to put my reading glasses on the way Brian Mulroney did. I used to admire watching him do this in the House, and he would put his glasses on and he would read a quote, and it was the most magnificent thing to watch. I couldn't believe it. Of course, I forgot them. But as I found myself elected to this place, I realized that I knew so many people that had worked for Prime Minister Mulroney, and he was the only political figure really in my lifetime that I ever really wanted to meet, that I was excited to meet. I thought I should really meet this man one day. I knew many people that worked. Bill Fox, who had been his communications director, he and I had worked together a little bit at a firm in Toronto. I knew Senator Segal, who was his chief of staff for a short time and ran for the leadership of our party. A great friend, and of course my dear friend Scott Munnick, who had served as his personal assistant, advance man, and for many years, and has continued to be not just in service to the Prime Minister, but a close personal family friend, and kind of like big brother to the Mulroney kids. And I finally said to Scott, I said, for goodness sakes, I know all you guys that have worked from all these years. Why have I never met him? And mercifully, a few years ago, Scott had arranged for me to finally meet Prime Minister Mulroney and his lovely wife, Mila. And it was a bit of a magical moment for me, going from those early days as an elementary school kid and thinking the Prime Minister responded to me, to being a member of this chamber, and to meet the man who was my hero. And he said to me when we stood for a picture, well, first I should tell you, he asked me what riding I represented, and I said, well, I represent Stan Darling Country, Prime Minister. And he loved that, and he told me many great stories, and he said, Stan was a great man. He's the reason we have an acid rain treaty. Everybody credits Prime Minister Mulroney with the magnificent negotiation skills, and Prime Minister Reagan for that relationship they had, and forging an almost inconceivable agreement on acid rain at the time. But in his humility, he never stopped praising Stan Darling for remembering that Stan was the man. We call him Stan, the man still in Paracel, Muskoka. But Stan never stopped fighting to save the lakes of the Canadian Shield, to save the forests of the Canadian Shield, to save maple syrup. And he said that, he told me these great stories. And then we stood for a picture. And it was very entertaining because I thought, I've been in public life 30 years. We stand for a picture. Now, do up your jacket, he says to me. I'm like, oh, yes, sir, Prime Minister, I'll do up my jacket. And we did up my jacket and felt myself prepared. And I had the opportunity to express to Mrs. Mulroney just the other day that story. She remembered it. I still can't believe she remembered it. And I said to her, it was just so lovely, that interaction, the first time I met him, and he was like, do up your jacket. And she said, of course he did. Because that picture is forever, Scott. And in the moment, I realized that that's something that Prime Minister Mulroney always understood. That what we do in here, that what we do in our lives, has an effect, has an impact forever. As I watch his beautiful family stand in that Hall of Honor, greeting every Canadian that comes in, who want to pay respects at the coffin of one of our great prime ministers, that this is forever. This will always be remembered. What we do here will always be remembered. Nation building is forever. And it's why I do believe that the words of King Solomon most appropriately apply to a man who I admired, who reached out to me, encouraged me, motivated me, and inspired me. That a good name is better than precious ointment. The day of death than the day of one's birth. It is better to go into the house of mourning than to the house of feasting, for that is, in the end for all men. And the living will lay this to their heart. May Brian Mulroney's example be one for all of us as we build a nation and as we do things here that will last forever. Thank you, Madam Speaker.